those who do not know the lessons of history are doomed to repeat it. History is also not just, can I succeed at trivia night?
History is the most unique of subjects because it is both an art and a science. Physics is a science. Poetry is an art. Like, we think of things as being either art or science. History actually is both, which is why, in my humble opinion, historians are also the biggest nerds on the planet. Remember, art is truth, goodness, and beauty. And it is the duty of the historian to reflect on the truth, the goodness, and the beauty of the past, and to present it in a good way. But you also have to be able to prove it, which is where the science comes in. History is ultimately about people. And when you study history, you are getting to know someone that lived before you. And to do it right, you have to put yourself in his shoes. So you can see him as a human being and not just a face in a picture or a name on a page. When you reduce the study of history to nothing but names and faces and dates, then you wind up being the people that celebrate when Charlie Kirk was killed.
Finally, flannel weather, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, rub it in, why don't you?
What are we drinking tonight, Ethan?
Four Roses, which, in my humble opinion, is actually the best bourbon that you're going to find for the price. Which, fortunately, Sam's Club carries it, and we have our Sam's Club membership. At least the one in our area carries it for about $17 a bottle.
Yeah, for the price, like you said, you can't go wrong. So
and it actually is just a really, really good bourbon. It has the feel, as good as it is, it kind of makes me feel like whoever is in charge over at Four Roses just kind of went, "Now we're breaking even. We're good. We don't need to raise our prices to artificially inflate our profit margin. We don't need to do that. We're breaking even. We're fine."
Yeah, it says something too about their better releases as well. If the base is that good, so.
And their small batch is fantastic.
I know. That's my go-to for mixing old fashions, like I've said before, and it's amazing by itself.
Which they have another one.
They've got a single barrel as well, and they have
it was the single barrel.
They have special releases as well that are like $60, $70 a bottle or something. But
which even that's not that high for a special release.
For something in the high end, like what they're doing,
for the quality that you're getting, for like a lot of other whiskeys, special release stuff is going to be $100, $120 a bottle.
Quite possibly, yeah.
Possibly.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got Four Roses over here just sitting some random place in Kentucky going, "Nah, we're good."
Mm-hmm.
Which is another reason I like it. I think it has the top place in my my opinion of bourbons. It has the top ranking in bourbon, in my opinion. Because while Elijah Craig is good, Woodford Reserve is good, maybe even objectively better quality, the quality to price ratio is really what I lean heavily on when I'm ranking things.
Mm-hmm.
Except when I'm ranking beer, and then my Irish blood demands that I put Guinness at the highest, just because of the Irish blood. But when I'm ranking things, I typically go from the quality to price ratio. This has the best quality to price ratio of any bourbon I've ever tasted. Even just their regular bourbon.
Fair enough. Yeah, for my own, I have New Riff Single Barrel again. And tonight I actually mixed it with a little bit of water, just a little bit, and it kind of opened it up. I rarely.
We were talking about that before the podcast, that it's like that it actually does. Like, I don't normally do that, but it does something to the flavor.
Yeah, just a little bit of water will open it up and get more flavor out of it. If you put more than that in, you're going to water it down too much, which is why I wouldn't put a glass of I wouldn't put a ice cube in whiskey unless I'm making an old fashioned, or unless I really didn't care too much about watering it down.
Or if you have a nice ice mold.
Yeah, and if I want to go
a couple years ago, I bought my brother a bottle of Four Roses small batch that came with rose ice molds.
Yeah, I've seen those.
It is really, really neat.
Yep. No, I know.
And that's basically like
pretty.
the ice mold has to be cool enough for me to actually want to put ice in my whiskey. But I can see, like, and I told you this before, that like putting an ice cube in your whiskey, which by the way means that you fill the whiskey glass up to a higher uh, level to
I should
balance
all
it out,
know.
just because of how physics work,
Mm-hmm.
to keep the ice into account. But I can see that as the ice melts, it maybe cuts the whiskey a little bit. And see, how do I word this? The first drinks, the first sips that you have of that are going to be higher in alcohol content, and the last sips of it will be lower in alcohol content. So you're actually drinking less alcohol per sip as you go along, as the ice is melting. Particularly
Yeah.
if you just have it for the conversation.
Mm-hmm. That's a fair point. Like it waters down the whiskey too much for my taste, but at that point you're going for a different type of experience. It's not
Yeah.
just about the taste, and so
Well, and
there's
if it waters down the
completely
whiskey a
valid.
little bit too much, then that's just an excuse to add just a little bit more whiskey.
Okay, fine. But
That's
yeah,
the Irish answer.
fair enough. Returning to this, yeah, it's got some, like, it tastes like a stronger whiskey. I'm not good with the palate notes and such. All I would say is that maybe it's just the water, maybe it's me, but there's like the richness of a molasses or like a dark brown sugar in there. Not like the thickness of that, or the sweetness of that, but just the richness of it
Mm.
is kind of back there, and I really like that. And also, speaking of quality per price ratio, one of the things that, like, I've never actually had their standard whiskey. I've only bought the single barrels, and the reason
Hmm.
for that is because they're literally like a $3 more expensive or something than the
Hmm.
standard, which I would never expect. Like the Four Roses single barrel is like 41 bucks, somewhere in there, and we know what it is for the standard. So
Hmm.
I don't know why a
It's
single
worth at
barrel.
least 60, but yes, they price it at 40. It's worth at least 60, but they price it at 40.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know why they don't price a single barrel higher. I mean, it's not a cheap whiskey. Like the base is pretty expensive, but I enjoy it, which is all that one really needs to say. I enjoy it.
Good whiskey is good whiskey. You don't have to buy the cheap stuff to enjoy it.
No, you don't.
And if I was to choose enjoyment of whiskey over, between the enjoyment that I would get from it and the price of the whiskey, I will pick the enjoyment that I get from it every time.
As you should.
Because that more leans into the purposes of drinking that we've already talked about.
Hmm.
So, because if you're talking only about the price, then it's I want to be able to drink as much as I possibly can and spend as little as I possibly can. Then you're drinking for the sake of drinking at that point. But if you put the quality of the whiskey first, then that's something that you can keep on the shelf until you have cause to take it down and pour it. And tonight we do. We're recording this on October the 7th, so we're drinking in honor of our victory over the Muslims at Lepanto.
Indeed. Worth another sip.
We drink because Don Juan of Austria writes home from the crusade.
Yes, and no, we will never shut up about it. The Battle of
No,
Lepanto was an amazing point in history.
no. And it pains me so badly that I don't have an actual ottoman to put my feet up on right now.
I should go get mine, just for this.
I should. I forgot for a second. I'm a carpenter. You know what? I should just build one.
You should. Go check out his
Build
wood shop,
myself an
people.
ottoman. Yes, please do.
Yeah,
There's going to
go
be some new stuff going up there for Christmas time.
go check it out. Maybe message him. Tell him to build you an ottoman. There's always a reason. There's always a reason. But speaking of history, history is our topic of discussion this evening, for a couple reasons. One, as we've said multiple times in this podcast, Ethan is the resident history major, and why not let him nerd out about this? And second, as has also been discussed, I think we live in turbulent times. I think we live in times of great societal change. And, there is that line, whether it's I know it's not properly worded according to the source, but those who do not know the lessons of history are doomed to repeat it. So it's worth taking our
We
time
looked that up the other
to.
night. We forgot who said it, but yeah,
Yeah,
it's
so
an
did
old
I.
saying.
Hmm. So it's worth knowing. It's worth knowing where we've come from. We've talked about we've talked about tradition before and its importance, but like history is something broader than that. And yet, history is also not just this collection of, it's not can I succeed at trivia night. It's not do I know these
Yeah,
facts and these dates and these names and you know can I do a timeline of history?
knowing what regiments were involved at the Battle of the Bulge is important for the sake of accuracy,
Hmm.
at least factual accuracy. But that is not the be all end all of history, which is one of the reasons that I think most people today both view and do history incorrectly.
Hmm.
And that may not necessarily be their fault. That may just be the course that the discipline of history has taken over the last century or so.
Hmm.
And I need to read up on my Dawson, but Christopher Dawson has a lot to say about how historians have viewed history and how the historiography of the West in general changed in the first half of the 20th century. He died in, I think, in 1970.
Hmm.
So he has a lot to say about that. He's got a lot of very good books. I highly recommend anything Christopher Dawson has ever written to anybody that listens to us, because in my opinion, he's probably the best historian of the last century, if not ever.
All right then. And yeah, we'll get into them, and we'll get more into what the discipline of history is and how all this works and what are the right
Mhm.
ways to do it. But just to drive this point home to our dear viewers, like the reason you should know this um, is so that you are wiser than those around you and that you do not make the mistakes that society sets you up to make, whether that's in marriage or finances or your
I
culture,
actually
how
I
your
have a
town is
book for that
functioning.
too. I have a book for that too. It's this one. It's called Why Study History by John
Hmm.
Fay.
Yeah.
And this is an excellent book. I think even people that don't really study history should read it, because it's not written in a difficult way or in a way that is difficult to read.
Hmm.
But I highly, highly recommend this book to anybody that is thinking about studying history or even has the question of why you should study history. He is a Christian and he responds from a Christian point of view. Um, but he makes a lot of arguments in this book that are not necessarily the Christian point of view arguments.
Hmm.
Or, you might read this book and find out that you're a Christian by the end of it. You never know.
Could be.
Which
So yeah, what?
I make no arguments about. I'm more than happy about. I'm more than happy about that. But
Yeah, what?
ultimately,
Yeah, what is the discipline of history? How would we define that?
so
How
like we've
how
already
should I?
said,
Yeah.
it's more than just names and places and dates, because that's the complaint that everybody has about the history courses that they took in high school
Hmm.
and before they actually go to college. I think it's sort of a failure of the modern education system that the history courses don't get interesting until you get to college.
Hmm.
And even then, sometimes they don't really get interesting until like your junior year of college. Like the actual study of history itself, for what it is not something that you need a ton of degrees for. Like you can actually be a historian without any degrees. I want to actually preface this conversation with that. It does help to have a degree. It does help to have the university education in history, as long as you have gone to a good university and you have been taught how to properly study history, because history is the most unique of subjects, because it is both an art and a science. Like Classically, we think of subjects being either an art or a science. Mathematics is a science. Music is an art. Physics is a science. Poetry is an art. Like we think of things as being either art or science. History actually is both. And it is, in my experience, the only subject that can be both art and science by its own nature. And what do I mean by that? So it is a science because there are methodologies and processes that one must follow in order to do it correctly, in order to have a good study of history and a good production of historical ideas. So I like to use the example of when you're writing an essay. You approach a historical essay the same way that you approach a science essay. Not 100% the same way, because when you're approaching a science essay, you have experiments and data and all those other things that you have to compile. But what I mean is that you start with a theory. But before you have a theory, you have to be asking a question. So history as a science is looking back at certain things and going, okay, what caused World War One? Which, and anybody that knows anything about the First World War will probably answer, well, how much time do we have? But you can then, from that question, form probably a more specific question. I would say, what was the most specific question that I can think of at the moment is, what was the most specific economic factor in the cause of World War One? Let's go with that.
Okay.
Because every war has at least an economic factor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what was the linchpin of that facet?
By the way, I don't know the answer to that question. I just asked it.
Mm-hmm. So how would you get the answer?
So you research a little bit about maybe a topic, because there's a difference between topic and theory. The topic is the broad sort of whatever your writing is about, and then the theory is the supposed answer to the question that you have in the first place. So you research that topic a little bit, and then you come up with a question. Then you research a little bit more, and you come up kind of with an answer. You research a little bit more, and that answer becomes a theory. And then you research to the point that you try to prove that theory. And we'll get into the ways that people do this incorrectly as well. But one of the ways that people do history incorrectly is by viewing it as either an art or a science, but it is both. Not acknowledging that it is both is actually a huge mistake on the part of the historian.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why, in my humble opinion, historians are also the biggest nerds on the planet. Because we have all the qualities of the art nerds, which are going to be so we have all the qualities of comic book nerds and all of the qualities of math nerds and science nerds.
Do I want that combination though?
I don't care. You've got it. That's what I am. I have all of the qualities of every kind of nerd that you could think of. But to some point, we'll even talk about what a nerd even is, because no matter if you're passionate about something and know a lot about it, you are a nerd for that thing. It could be football. You can be a football nerd. That is possible. But anyway, I would define you as a sports nerd.
Less so than I used to be in the past.
Less so than you were in the past, but when around the time when we first met and when we were in college together, you were a sports nerd.
Yeah.
But I would say that historians are the biggest nerds, because we have basically every aspect of every other kind of nerd. To be a good historian, you have to have those aspects. I will go that far as to say that you have to have basically every quality of every kind of nerd in order to be a good historian. You have to have the creative aspect of a D&D nerd. So the best DM you can think of. You have to have that kind of creative aspect, but you also have to have the analytical aspect of the biggest science nerd that you can think of. Also, why I think personally history is the ultimate subject. And we'll get to that in a moment.
Oh, it makes sense. you're sifting through all of the data of everything that's happened, which is, well, about as vast as something can get. So, yeah, you better be a nerd about that. You better be willing to dive into it. But you also better be creative and a good storyteller, because you can't just, like we said, it's not just a collection of facts. And you
Yeah.
can't write a book that's a pure collection of facts because no one will read it. So you have to tell it through the lens of a story.
This is why I was given the advice. Uh, my when did I take that class? I think it was my senior year of high school, or of college rather. My senior year of college, I was given the advice to not pursue higher education in history any farther. Don't go for a master's and don't go for a doctorate. Because any further education course in history, any system of education in history, will take every creative cell in your body and murder it right in front of your eyes. And that is basically a direct quote from one of my favorite history professors that I've ever had. And he even sort of lamented, he had been a doctor of history for 13 years, I think, at this point, that he'd had his doctorate. And he said, I am old. I am just now. I've been a doctor of history for over 10 years. I am just now getting back the creative thinking that I had when I first started.
Hmm.
So, and this is where history becomes an art. One of the ways, at least, that history becomes an art, because when you are writing in history, when you are instructing people about history, like you said, it has to be a story. A good historian is a good storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
Today is October the 7th. I should be able to sit down and tell you and fully understand what led to the Battle of Lepanto, but also tell an amazing and fantastic and attention grabbing story of the Battle of Lepanto.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't have to, because Chesterton already wrote the poem. You can go and look it up for yourself. One of the best poems ever written, in my opinion.
There you go. Even though it's historical fiction, Louis de Wohl wrote The Last Crusader, which I'll always mention with fondness in my heart. So
Yes, I have not read that. I understand it is an excellent novel.
there's a reason it is one of the books behind me
Well,
in this row.
really,
So
anything Louis de Wohl has written is excellent. The Golden Thread, I think he also wrote about St. Ignatius, is fantastic. He wrote a novel
okay.
about St. Joan of Arc that I did read that is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Anything Louis de Wohl has written, go out and read. And yes,
Yep.
The Last Crusader, that too.
So
Dominic's
viewers
about
have
to
a
show
visual.
it.
My lights are fun, but yeah, go pick up a copy of that.
Don Juan of Austria is going off to war. So that's the way that history is an art. You have to be a good storyteller. So when you're writing in history, in order to make it interesting, history for the masses, like Dawson would say,
Mm-hmm.
you almost have to write it like you're writing a novel in a way that grabs people's attention. And you don't have to appeal to everybody, because not everybody's going to be interested in the topic that you're talking about. I love the Flying Tigers. One of my favorite pre-World War II stories is the story of the Flying Tigers, which was a group of fighter pilots that the United States sent to China to
Hmm.
both protect them from the Japanese and train Chinese fighter pilots. And they were dissolved only a few months before the attack on Pearl Harbor. That's one of my favorite stories. I'm okay if you're not interested in the Flying Tigers. I
Mm-hmm.
love the Flying Tigers. I think they're awesome. I think the P-40, the P-40 Warhawk is an amazing plane. You don't have to think of that. I think it primarily because I love the Flying Tigers. I think it's a neat story.
Yeah. Well, and since life is a story, why not? Why can't history be it? History
Exactly.
should be it, like we're saying.
Basically, everything is a story, and it should be told in an interesting way.
Mm-hmm.
There are some things that are just objectively not interesting. Like telling the life story of a guy who has never actually done anything interesting and has pretty much just sat on his couch and watched television for his entire life. Yeah, that's boring. and we should not be aiming for that at all.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're telling the story of Don John of Austria, that is interesting, and that is awesome, and that we can tell in a beautiful and artistic way. Because remember, art is truth, goodness, and beauty.
Yes, it is.
And it is the duty of the historian to reflect on the truth, the goodness, and the beauty of the past, and to present it in a good way. And it is also to use more of a modern idea about art. It's somewhat up to interpretation. You could say that this specific economic factor was the driving factor of the First World War. Or you could say that this specific social factor was the driving factor of the First World War. Or you could say that this specific religious factor was the driving factor of the First World War. And to an extent, all those answers are right.
Mm-hmm.
For one, because the First World War is just that complicated of an issue.
Mm-hmm.
But for another, because it is the historian's prerogative to go, no, I think it's this. But you also have to be able to prove it, which is where the science comes in. Is you have to be able to write a proof.
That all makes sense. Man, it's a beautiful description of what history is. Someone could listen to that and say multiple things that effectively amount to I don't care. Maybe I don't care because, well, I think life is fine, so we're going to end up fine. I don't care about, those who do not know the lessons of history are doomed to repeat it. Or I do care about that, but I'm just lazy. Or maybe I just trust the history professors that I had growing up. Like, they seem to have been right about a number of things. Like, why would I question that? Facts are facts. So why should we care about doing history the right way?
So facts do matter, and the names and the places and the dates, they do matter. Like, never will you ever hear me say that they don't.
Mm-hmm.
And again, for people that say that, well, not really again, but for people that say that I just don't care, in that case, my response is just, okay, there's nothing I can do for you. Because if you don't care in the first place, caring about something, that has to be on you. I can't force you to care about something.
Mm-hmm.
So if you genuinely just don't care about history, there's nothing I can do about that. I can make it as interesting as possible, but if you just don't care to learn about it, there's nothing I can do, and I'm not going to waste my energy or yours trying to make you care. But while facts do matter, if your whole thing is, well, I think that in the fourth grade I got a good enough understanding of history just learning the names and faces and places and dates, while those things do matter, and it takes a much bigger nerd than me to delve into why the location of the Battle of the Bulge does in fact matter. History is more than names and faces and places and dates. You should be able to put the face to the name because you should be able to put the face to the name when you're talking to any other person.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people have had the experience of somebody coming up to you on the street or at a party and going, hey, how's it going? And acting as though you've met him and you have no idea who you're talking to. You should be able to put names to faces because that's just the right thing to do. But at the same time, it's more than names and faces and places and dates. History is more than just facts. And while you can get very excited about facts, and while you can think that, oh, these facts are really cool, that's fine. I don't have any objection to that. That is not the culmination of the subject of history as a study. Because history is ultimately about people. And when you study history, you are getting to know someone that lived before you. And to do it right, you have to put yourself in his shoes and try to think the way that he thought, or at least understand the way that he thought. So you can see him as a human being and not just a face in a picture or a name on a page.
Hmm.
which is unfortunately what the modern study of history in schools has done. Like, too many people think that history is just names and places and faces and dates. So basically, it treats people, actual human beings who did exist, who were real, whose only difference from yourself is that you're alive and they're dead. The modern idea of history, which is a conception of the last century or so,
Hmm.
that modern idea has basically led to the dehumanization of everybody who has ever existed before you.
Yeah.
Because you think of them as just faces in a picture, or names on a page, or facts, or characters in a story. Ultimately, to do history right, you have to know that they are real people. And my final answer for why you should do history correctly and why you should care that it's done correctly, the same reason why you should care that math and science are done correctly. If math and science, math and physics are done correctly, 2 plus 2 equals 4, and buildings don't fall down. Buildings don't fall down because 2 plus 2 equals 4. Buildings don't fall down because the guy that designed them understood 2 and 2 make 4, 2 and 3 make 5.
Hmm.
History is that for society. And understanding history, not that everybody has to understand it, not that everybody has to fully have a complete and comprehensive knowledge of the history of your peoples. That's not what I'm saying. Having a good understanding of history is as important as having a good understanding of physics and construction and mathematics. Because there are facts that you need to know, and there is a right way to interpret those facts.
Hmm.
And there is a right method to use in acquiring those facts. So
What you
that's
said about
ultimately is why you study history.
what you said about the dehumanization. I mean, all of what you said rings true, but like here's a story from history. Here's actual history, I guess, that might illustrate that point. So, why did Brutus kill Caesar?
Well, because everybody else had convinced him that it was the right thing to do.
How did they convince him? In Roman society, your name mattered. Your name mattered and through all of its ancestral history. So Caesar did his things, and the way that people convinced Brutus to kill Caesar was basically remember that you're named Brutus, which makes no sense unless you understand that the name Brutus had a particular significance in this way. An actual historian can tell you more about that, but I understand that that was the case.
A
And
historian
that,
of the Roman Empire, I can't really.
yeah, I don't actually think about the
The
Roman
Roman
Empire
Empire is
every
not
day.
my thing.
Fair enough. Fair enough. But like to understand that that type of thing had that amount of power over him where he had to then do it says something about the culture. It doesn't justify the action or anything, but it humanizes it. And we ought to do that for other things. So say, for example, I don't want the Holocaust to happen again. Well, how did the Holocaust start? And I'm not a historian, so I can't answer this question, but it wasn't simply, oh, the Germans decided they were the best and they decided they hated the Jews. Like, I'm not saying that's wrong, but there's more going on there.
That suffices
Eh,
for a short answer, but there is a lot more going on there than that.
yeah.
The longest form answer is that after the First World War, um, within Germany, there were kind of two parties of how they thought of how the war ended. One was that, oh, we were betrayed, and the other was that we were just lied to. And so these different parties are blaming different people for it. And then when Hitler comes out with Mein Kampf, he basically just says, oh, you're both not entirely right, but you're also both not entirely wrong. Let me show you who is at fault: the Jews. And when you are a people completely who have been thinking that you've been winning the war up until the moment that the Kaiser surrendered, I should have prefaced that as that Germany's propaganda campaign during the First World War was so good that everyone who lived inside Germany genuinely thought they were winning until the
No, they
Kaiser
weren't.
surrendered, even when they were definitively losing for the last 4 months of the war. They genuinely thought they were winning up until the point when, oh, where we have now just lost. We were winning and now all of a sudden we've lost. So it's the we were betrayed and we were lied to. There was the sort of military and the populace. And then Hitler just basically takes both sides and points both of them at the Jews,
Hmm. Yeah, and adding
which is
some
how you get the
hyperinflation and
Holocaust.
starvation as well. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
hyperinflation, starvation, and some pre-existing prejudice against Jews
Hmm.
in Germany to begin with. The Jews are just a very easy group of people to blame for things. Just look at what's happening now.
But this point about the Holocaust illustrates, how a country full of, okay, evil people, but also normal people, we'd say, could turn against the Jews in such a fashion. And what does that mean for us? Why should I care? Well, maybe it would widen your eye. It would open your eyes to the possibility that some of those patterns might be repeating themselves in your modern life, and you're like, oh yeah, so that's how that happened.
Or
You
it can
know,
be a cause for introspection. Like, do I have any of my own prejudices that could cause me to irrationally think of an entire group of people in a certain way?
exactly. Yep.
Or that
You
could
can.
cause me to, hear a certain word and then all of a sudden be okay with violence being done to the other side.
Hmm.
When you reduce the study of history to nothing but names and faces and dates, then there's less of a mass understanding, basically, of why Charlie Kirk was killed and other like big things of that sort. Then you wind up being the people that celebrate when Charlie Kirk was killed. So, not studying history, not understanding how some people in the past, and they are people, they are human beings, and you should treat them that way. Not understanding how some people in the past have viewed themselves, viewed other people, and how those views have affected their own decisions can lead to you not fully understanding yourself, your people, and your decisions.
So in other words, you will be better, and your society will be better if you actually pay attention to history in the proper fashion. So
A proper study of history, not just like the cold hard facts and then everything else you just decide for yourself.
exactly.
Which is where we're kind of going to get into the historical fallacies.
Yeah. So what are some of
Some of
the? I
the
mean, what are some of the other ways in which we can do this wrong? I mean, we've said some obviously, but
There's a lot of ways in which we can do this wrong. In fact,
generally the case.
David Hackett Fisher wrote an entire book on why people can do this, on how people can do this wrong. And basically, the entire book is actually called "Historical Fallacies"
Hmm.
by David Hackett Fisher. You should go and read it. It's very good. And it's probably, I would say, first read Why Study History by John Fay, then read Historical Fallacies by David Hackett Fisher, then before you decide to be a historian.
Hmm.
If you're a historical enthusiast, that's fine. We'll get into the differences later. But if you want to be an actual historian, read Why Study History and Historical Fallacies by David Hackett Fisher. Very, very good. I don't remember all the ones he outlined, and I don't actually currently own a copy of the book, so I can't present them to you at the moment. But one that I do remember is the Acton fallacy. Now, this is named for the Lord Acton, who was an actual British member of Parliament in the early 19th century. A very good man. I believe he was a Catholic. If he wasn't, I'm sure I'll be corrected. But I'm pretty sure he was a Catholic. And he is widely considered to be one of the greatest historians of all time. But there's a catch. He never actually he never actually wrote anything other than
Hmm.
some essays, like a couple essays a year for magazines.
Hmm.
That's all he wrote. But why is he considered one of the best historians? Because his collection of historical works And the notes that he took on those works is more vast than anything that any historian had taken before or has taken since. Like, it is
The
insane.
nerd
Just
of
look
all
up
nerds.
basically the nerd of all nerds. But he has a fallacy named after him. Why is that? Well, you either have to be really, really good at what you do or really, really bad at what you do to have a fallacy named after you for
Yep.
that particular subject. The Lord Acton's greatest flaw, the reason that he never actually wound up completing his magnum opus, which was effectively a comprehensive history of Europe, was that he fell victim to this idea that you have to have all of the information possible before you even start writing, which is a huge mistake. And you absolutely don't have to have every possible piece of information and every possible source before you start writing. But that was why the Lord Acton spent his entire professional life, or his entire life period, just collecting sources and resources before he even started writing, or before he was even able to finish what would have been his magnum opus, his greatest work, his greatest creation. It was because he had the idea that you have to have every piece of information available before you can even start writing. That's not at all the case.
Hmm.
I have several novels I'm trying to write. This is something that I have to push past in the writing process. I'm sure some of them out there will agree with me. You don't have to have every bit of information about every single country in your novel figured out before you start writing it. Some things can be learned along the way, and some things you may just never get to. That is okay. So that is the one fallacy that I can actually remember vividly. There are a
By any
couple
means.
that I have vaguely, like, fuzzy recollections of what they are, but I don't want to touch them for fear that I might get them incorrect. But the Acton fallacy is the one that I remember the most vividly.
Mm-hmm.
For any others, I direct you to David Hackett Fisher. Excellent book. I wish I had a copy of it right now, and I wish that I could remember what he said in it. But I do remember that it was excellent, and everybody should read it before. Like, you should at least read that so you know what to avoid when you're studying history.
Mm-hmm.
That and, Why Study History by John Fay.
So beyond fallacies, what else would you say?
There is the historian's mortal sin. And this is something even greater and more dangerous than a fallacy. It is anachronism. And there are two ways of viewing it as the historian's mortal sin. There's the sort of scientific, oh, heaven forbid I ever get any fact right, or ever get any fact wrong idea. Ultimately, anachronism comes down to factual inaccuracy, but that's the short definition. It is far more than that. So usually when we think of anachronism, academically, when we think of anachronism, say you're watching a movie, a Western, that is set in, I don't know, we'll say 1870.
Okay.
And every character in that Western is carrying a Colt single action army. Well, the Colt single action army didn't come out until I think 1872. And that was not a widely sold firearm until 1872.
Okay.
That is typically how we think of anachronism. But there is a much more sinister and much more dangerous way that anachronism is practiced, and it is very much ignored broadly in the historical community, unfortunately. And it is when you impose your own morality and your own ideas on somebody else in the past.
Hmm.
The most common version of this is, at least the one that people will probably think of when I say this, is the American South in the Civil War, the antebellum South. Well, they were all bad people because they owned slaves.
And so slavery bad.
And slavery bad, so slave owners bad. Therefore, they're bad people. Well, It's not that simple. Not exactly that easy to answer. General Robert E. Lee owned a lot of slaves. But I personally still think him to be the finest man ever to wear a uniform in any man's army, especially in the army of this United States and in the Confederate States. He's the finest man ever in uniform.
Okay. Why is that?
Yeah, he owned slaves, but he was just a good man. You look at his life, you read about him, you read the letters that he wrote, the things that he said. He was just a good man. Yeah, he owned slaves. That was perfectly normal and acceptable for basically everybody at the
Mm-hmm.
time. So me, for one, I don't look at at the fact that they owned slaves. I looked at how they treated their slaves, or how it was recorded that people actively treated their slaves, or how slaves were treated under that particular person.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're allowing your taskmasters to treat your slaves very poorly, then you're a poor master.
Yeah.
Or if you yourself are treating them poorly, then you're a bad master. You're a terrible person if you are beating your slaves. But General Lee had a clause in his will, his last will and testament, that all of his slaves would be freed upon his death. That they would all be given irrevocable papers of emancipation. And that was the same idea that his father had had. And I think his grandfather before him, who had fought side by side with George Washington.
Hmm. But wait, Robert E. Lee fought the North, and the North was trying to free slaves. You know,
The
and
North
we're not
wasn't
gonna.
necessarily. We won't get into that. We have an entire. Well,
Yeah.
we'll have an entire episode on the Civil War in which we'll have a good friend of ours join us, um,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe a couple of other people join us. But the North wasn't exactly the righteous liberators that you thought they were. We'll just go with
No.
that.
Yeah. For now, we'll say things are complicated, and like you said with
Yes,
Robert E. Lee, uh, yeah, you shouldn't. I mean, if your entire culture said this was normal, like you
and
said,
your economy relies on it.
yeah. So
Like the economy of the South and the economy of the greater United States before the war relied on slavery. When
so there's even
when your country's GDP relies on slavery, you're going to have a hard time saying that it's a bad thing.
exactly. So can you really blame? Can you really blame somebody for that? I don't know. Like a similar example in my head would be people that are on birth control. Most forms of birth control are
Yeah.
abortion, and I believe abortion is murder. Um, and that
Well,
it
and even
is
the
a
ones that aren't, it's just wrong.
yeah, it's wrong for other grave reasons, but yeah, abortion and birth control are horribly grave evils. Do I think that you're a horrible person if you use birth control? No. Rare would it be that you actually are for that reason. Because if that's all you've been taught growing up, that this is fine and to be expected, why wouldn't you think differently?
And that was just normal for it was actually the majority of women for the latter half of the 20th century just took birth control because that was just supposedly the normal thing that you would do.
Mm-hmm.
And the Catholics were the only one who were objecting to it. And not even all Catholics, just some Catholics
Mm-hmm.
were the only ones who objected to it. So while it is a grave moral evil, if all you know is what the world tells you, and the world tells you that it's not and that it's fine and that it's even something you should do, I will never hold that against you.
Mm-hmm.
Because I treat you like a human being.
Mm-hmm.
And human beings should be treated with understanding. Even if they're dead. Just the
Yep.
people of the past. That's why we call them the people of the past, not the figures of the past, not the characters of the past. They are the people of the past.
Yep.
They were human beings. They were flawed. Some things were unavoidable. They did things wrong. But it's best if you just approach it with the idea that they did the best with what they had.
Yeah, and if you accept for yourself that, like, when you die, 50 years later, people may come to some sort of understanding about morality that, um, no, that in this one manner or something, you were actually very, 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 very much in the wrong. Like, how would you want to be remembered? With the respect that you're owed.
Be remembered by how you were right.
Yeah, with the respect and with the humanity with which you're owed. We're not calling evil good in this case. We're just calling you a
No,
human being.
evil is still evil, and I'll still say slavery isn't evil.
Yeah.
Slavery is wrong. Slavery is an offense to the dignity of the human person. When you treat a human being like property, that is wrong.
Yeah.
But I've actually done my research as a historian, and I understand how people back then thought. And that's the kind of anachronism that I'm talking about, the very, very dangerous kind, which is when you impose your own ideas and your own morality on them, which is also an incredibly cynical thing to do, by the way. And a good example of this, I'll go back to the movies for this. The movie Kingdom of Heaven.
I remember watching that in
Only,
college and not being impressed.
yeah, you and I saw it at the same time, and you were not impressed. I was nauseated. That movie is good up until Liam Neeson dies.
Okay.
In like the first 15 minutes. After that, basically everybody in that entire movie thinks like a modern person except the king. The king is the only person in that entire movie who genuinely believes what he is saying. And when you are writing a movie and it comes to the point where you have a night hospitaller during a crusade, the Second Crusade, basically saying that he doesn't even believe in God, you have done something horribly wrong.
Mm-hmm. For all
You
the
don't
obvious
even
reasons.
understand what the night hospitallers were. They were monks with swords, which is about as awesome and badass as you can
Yeah.
possibly
So
get.
that's pretty
And
dope.
and I'll be one of the first people to call for a revival of the militant orders. But when you have a Knight Hospitaller basically saying that he doesn't believe in God, and a high-ranking Knight Templar basically pretty much admitting that he's only in it for the money and the land, you have done something terribly wrong, because you are looking at that and looking at the bare bones facts of what happened. And yeah, corrupt people exist. Yes, evil people exist. Yes, there are always people who say one thing and think something different. That's entirely
Mm-hmm.
true. But when
Yep.
you think that every time somebody believes something, and then believes something different, that is cynicism. And when you do it to somebody in the past, that's a terrible anachronism. And you have just imposed your own ideas on that person.
We talk about the importance of maintaining people's reputations. The same applies to people that are dead.
Code of Canon Law number 220.
Like we said, folks, he's a nerd about everything.
I'm probably one of the few laymen that is not an active paid canon lawyer that has a copy of the Code of Canon Law on my
Yeah.
shelf. Here it is. It's right here. I have an actual copy of the Code of Canon Law because the university library was purging books, and this
Hmm.
particular edition was on it. And I said, hey, it might be useful. That's how much of a nerd I am.
There you go. There you go.
But yes, Canon number 220. No one may unlawfully harm the good reputation which a person enjoys or violate the right of any person to protect his or her privacy. Which is basically a good reason to say why Catholics can't be conspiracy theorists. Which is another way that people do history wrong.
Yeah.
It oftentimes is a form of anachronism. But that just is another way that people do history wrong, where they look at the past and they try to brute force their theory as to why things are the way they are. Now, some conspiracies have been proven.
Mm-hmm.
I'll grant that. But to automatically assume every single time that the official story is not true and that you're going to go and prove something else is kind of not right. Not kind of, it's very not right. You should never try to do that. Especially if you just never leave your house. If you decide that you're going to do this from the comfort of your own home, or your office, and then come up with an entire theory as to why the modern nation of Israel is to blame for every problem in Western civilization. The modern nation of Israel, which didn't exist before 1949, is somehow to blame for the First World War, then you're
Yeah,
doing something horribly wrong.
yeah, and this is coming, folks, from two people who are anything but Zionist apologists. Like,
No, I don't trust
no,
Netanyahu as far as I can throw it. Like, my
yeah,
personal opinion of what needs to be done with the Holy Land is another crusade. Like, we should take it back and present it to the Holy Father as the new papal Zouaves. That's what we need to do.
sounds good to me.
That's the best possible thing for Israel and Palestine. But I also recognize that that's probably not going to happen. I also think the United States ought to become a confessional state, and we need to have, presidents and, congressmen and Supreme Court justices basically all acknowledge the validity of the Church of Rome. But that's probably also not going to happen.
Yeah, sign me up for it if it does so.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm totally down for that.
Yeah, but no, it gets at the point, right? Like, it's unscientific.
Yeah.
It's unscientific to propose conspiracy theories because you're starting with like an observation, but you're not
Yeah.
observing enough, and your hypothesis is not going to hold water unless you actually do brute force it.
It's like
If you are
saying that,
open-minded
it's like
about
saying
it,
my house burnt down because of the Jewish space laser. When the fire department just told you that it burned down because you left a candle lit
yeah, it's like, no, I know
by
they've
your
been working on.
curtains.
I know they've been working on this weapon, and I know that that they maybe don't like people, and I know Mossad is interesting, shall we say? So
And shady, yeah.
I guess they hit me with a space laser. I know it.
Even though
I
you're a
know it.
nobody, that nobody would like. Why would they even care about you?
Yeah.
Like, no, maybe you just left that candle lit, or maybe you just left the stove on when you shouldn't have.
Mm-hmm. This is why I say extreme views require extreme proof. Like, if you can back it up, great. But
Irrefutably, there's a reason that in court they demand that you prove it beyond the shadow of a doubt.
yeah, even if you don't go that far, like, where's the greatest weight of evidence? And can this withstand criticism? And can you be open-minded about it and come to this conclusion? Can you honestly assess multiple different possibilities
And you should at
and
least
come to
leave
that
your house
conclusion?
when you're trying to prove it.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah.
That too. So, yeah, both Ethan and I have very serious beef with a number of conspiracy theories. So,
Most of them
they're not all
involving
wrong,
the
but
Jews.
well,
There are some
only so many of them.
with the Jews in the modern nation state of Israel. I can see at least where the starting point is, but it just goes so far.
Well,
So
the
off
reason
the
you can
beaten
say
path.
mostly about the Jews is just because you haven't listened to enough conspiracy theories. People are crazy.
Oh, I've listened to plenty. The ones about the Jews are the most rational ones, and even those I refuse to listen to because of how irrational they are.
Okay.
that's that's where it goes from there.
Mm-hmm.
I acknowledge their starting point, and then from there, I'm like, yeah, okay, but what about this too? Which is, by the way, another way that people get history wrong when you're proving history. Or not really another way. This is kind of how we're talking about it. When you are forming a hypothesis or a theory of why a certain thing has happened, you need to be okay with being proven wrong,
Mm-hmm.
with having a wrong answer to start off with. And even in the work that you're writing, say, I thought this first, but now, after all this evidence, I actually think this. And you can actually go back. This is I know this is a wild idea, but this is one of the things that I was taught in every history course I ever took from the greatest professor of history ever. It is okay to go back and revise your question and answer if you realize you have approached a dead end in research.
Because it's pure honesty.
By the way, that professor that I am talking about was Dr. Joseph Stewart, who wrote Rethinking the Enlightenment, that you can get from Sophia Institute Press. And I will shamelessly promote the book that he wrote. This is a very, very good book. And he's a very, very good professor of history.
We will link it in the description. But yeah, no, it's
But
just
you have
pure,
to be okay with being
honesty.
proven wrong, and just be honest with yourself. That actually is what humility is as a virtue. It isn't thinking that you're not as great as you actually are. Humility as a virtue is just being honest with yourself, acknowledging what abilities and talents you have, but then knowing where they end and knowing what is beyond you,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as an
and
example,
acknowledging when you're wrong.
yeah, as an example, I've gone through a rather insane period in my life with OCD and scruples, and both during that time and in the time after that, when I've been, largely improved, there are times when I will, say something to Ethan and I'll make some point, whether I think he's doing something wrong or something else. And the difference between insane me and sane me is when I get given the answer that says I'm wrong, in the past I would have held on to my view. And now I just shut up and I'm like, okay, good point. I stand corrected. I happily change my opinion. The
And
end.
I was there. I was there for insane you. I remember that vividly,
Yeah. Oh, I
so I can
remember enough of
attest
it
to
too.
that. I remember it as well. You're not just making it up. I distinctly remember this, and I also have at times gone, huh. Well, I guess I was wrong.
Yeah. But this also fuels my particular hatred of conspiracy theories because in the thought process of the people that um, put them forth and try and defend them, I see the same crap that I did back in the day. No, mine was fueled by mental illness, and I'm not saying those people are mentally ill because no, they're not
I would.
necessarily. Some of them definitely. Some of them are. Some of them
I
aren't.
would. Radically
But
following conspiracy theorists is a form of mental illness, and if you are, you need to stop.
fair enough. Whether it's actually attributable to mental illness or not, different question. But the thought process is still the same. I recognize that I know what damage it did to me. I despise it, and yeah, it puts me on the defense around those people, which doesn't mean that I can't say that they're right. But what I'll come back to is just show me the evidence. Like if you can give me good evidence that something happened, you know, what you said happened actually happened, then like okay, fine. I'm open to
Ultimately,
that.
this is to say that this particular fallacy that we're talking about, that most conspiracy theorists fall into, is being so unwilling to be wrong.
Yeah.
So let's say you research a little bit, then you come up with a question, and then you research a little bit more, and then somehow you come up with some wild answer, and you just decide that that's the right answer, that you are so unwilling to be wrong that you do everything and you deliberately direct your line of research to prove that answer in such a way that you will, to the exclusion of every other potential line of research and every other potential answer, and just brute force your way to proving your point.
Mm-hmm.
And this gets particularly dangerous when you involve people who have a knack and a talent for telling stories, which a historian should have.
Mm-hmm.
But when you have that knack and talent for telling stories without the humility that a good scientist needs to be willing to be proven wrong, then you wind up running into all sorts of issues
Yeah.
of this. Well, I think this is right, so it is right. And I am now going to convince everybody that reads what I write that I am in of the correct point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And that is dangerous. And there are some people out there now who come up with wild conspiracy theories, but they're good enough at telling the story
Yep.
that they get people to believe it, which is why you need both the talent of a storyteller and the skills of a scientist. Like, you cannot
Yeah.
separate the art and the science of history. You have to keep them together. and you have to back it up with sources. They like to say now, or at least they did a couple of years ago, I'm a little bit behind. I've got 3 kids. I'm officially an old man. Show the receipts. You've got to show the receipts. You have got to show the evidence, show your sources, and cite them. All this to say, don't be so convinced of your own rightness that you will exclude every other piece of evidence that you might be wrong.
Yeah.
You should have some confidence in what you're writing. But if you are pursuing a path of research and you go, oh, well, or along that path and you're kind of going, well, this is maybe kind of not seeming like it is, don't try to brute force it. Completely backtrack to where you started and pick a different path. Say, okay, well, maybe it wasn't that. Maybe it was this. And yes, I understand that's a lot of time and a lot of effort that may seem like it was wasted, but it actually wasn't because you did just learn something.
Mm-hmm.
Acknowledging that you were wrong means that you have learned something more important than just learning whether or not you were right. Sometimes the best thing that you can do intellectually is admit that you're wrong
Mm-hmm.
and that somebody else was right, particularly if you are proven wrong.
Can confirm it's very healthy, yeah. And I'll just briefly say, anybody who says like, well, does that mean you can't have faith or that you can't trust because you must keep questioning everything and then being open-minded and such? There's an
No, that's
intellectual
not what I'm
honesty there.
saying.
Yeah, no. There's an intellectual honesty there, sure, but like, yeah, I can come to something where I reasonably trust it and have faith in it. That can be a relationship, that can be my religion, the Catholic faith, all sorts of things that, yeah, then withstand whatever accusations come up against it because the weight of evidence is behind it, and whether I can remember that at any particular moment or not, I know I have reason to have faith in this. And
Which that I think is why the high profile conspiracy theorists have traction, is because they were right about things before,
yeah,
but when they're potentially wrong about something, they've been right at least enough times before that they refuse to believe that they can ever be wrong.
yep. And if you want help differentiating
And the
those,
people that follow them refuse to believe that they can ever be wrong.
yeah. And if you want help differentiating those, like, okay, what should I pay attention to of those and which ones shouldn't I return to a point we've made before. By their fruits you shall judge them. You know? For many conspiracy theories, the fruits are, what? Angst, anxiety, slowly separating yourself farther and farther from family and friends,
And
becoming more of a
society in
recluse.
general.
Yeah, like,
Yeah.
what part of that is healthy?
Absolutely none of it.
Yeah, which means it's
I don't
fueled
care
by
if you're an
something unhealthy,
introvert.
most likely.
If you're an introvert, I don't care. It's not healthy for you to just shut yourself up in a room and think only to yourself the entire time.
Yeah. Speaking as an introvert.
Both of us technically being introverts.
Yeah.
But that even itself further comes from something of a misunderstanding of what history actually is, which we've kind of gone over. It's not just the collection and the mass amalgamation of names and faces and places and dates.
Yep.
Like, you're talking about people. So show some damn respect.
Yeah, like we said.
Like, there's an old saying, don't remember who said it specifically. The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there.
That's a good line. Says a lot of what
Anytime
we've
you
been saying.
are anytime you are going into the past, which is what you do when you are studying history, you are stepping into another era. You are basically, intellectually, you're doing the same thing as if I was to go and visit, I don't know, Thailand. They do a lot of things differently in Thailand than they do in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to be okay with that. When I go and visit another country, even if I go and visit another Western country, like I've done this. I went to Italy. I've been to Italy. When I went there, I didn't go with I'm an American, so I'm just going to expect everybody to speak English. Not treating people in the past, anachronism, is a similar kind of thing as going to another country and expecting everybody there to speak your language and think the same way you do.
Yeah, how well is that
And
going to
I
go?
I put that and in there and have both of those things there because England and Scotland and Ireland and South Africa and Australia all speak the same language as we do. They don't think the same way we do.
Mm-hmm.
They have different ways of doing things. Or in Canada, I forgot about Canada, but Canada is very forgettable. Another country might have a different language or might have a different way of doing things, a way of thinking about something. You have to understand that before you go there. Which, by the way, is one of the, like, if I was to ever give anybody a recommendation, if you're going to another country, don't make an effort as much to learn the language and the grammar as to learn the accent, speaking the language correctly, pronouncing the language correctly. Because they'll know by looking at you you're a foreigner. They'll know by looking at you and how you act that you don't belong there, especially if it's a place in the country where there's a lot of tourism. I spent 10 days in Paris. The one time I was complimented on my French was when literally the only thing I said was thank you. I said
Yeah, I bet.
merci. I said merci. And the waiter, a Frenchman, a Parisian, said, "Oh, you speak very good French." And I said, "Merci."
I think you
Because
memorized the right phrase.
it wasn't just the words, it was the pronunciation. It was learning how they say it, not necessarily what they say. You can have horrible grammar, but if your pronunciation is right, then most of the time they'll actually understand that you're trying. Whereas even if you have good grammar, if your pronunciation is wrong and you're not even trying, one, they may not even really understand what you're saying. And two, they're going to be pissed off because you're not putting any effort into speaking their language correctly. Which is why if you can't speak another language, don't go to a place that speaks another language. If you're going to travel internationally, go to some place that has English as its main language. There's a lot of them.
You're very spoiled.
So there's that very short rant anyway, only because I don't think there's another. I don't see a place for that in another full episode later on. So, but there's that short rant.
That makes sense.
But yes, and the reason that you do that, the reason that you try to assimilate to the culture that you go to, it's the same reason when you're studying history, you try to assimilate yourself, or at least put yourself in the shoes of the people that you're studying, because you're talking about people, human beings. So treat them like human beings. Show the respect that they're owed. And when you learn enough about a person in history that isn't worth the respect, you don't have to. Beyond what is the basic amount of human respect that is owed the dignity of the human person. Like, we can all say that Hitler was an evil man.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have to spend a great deal of time proving that Hitler was evil.
No, we don't.
Unfortunately, I do have to spend a great deal of time proving that Erwin Rommel was actually a good man.
Who was he?
The Desert Fox. One of the most brilliant military strategists that Germany ever had. But he had too many ideological oppositions to the Fuhrer, so they just sort of stuck him in North Africa with basically a shoestring budget. And he still almost didn't let the Allies through. That's how brilliant he was. Even when he was given the absolute worst possible equipment, the worst conditions, basically no assistance. The Allies, the United States and the British had a hell of a time trying to get through Africa when Rommel was put in charge. So he was a brilliant strategist, but he was also actually a decent man.
Mm-hmm.
And he was one that made it absolutely clear that he did not at all subscribe to Hitler's ethnic cleansing of Germany, but he wouldn't stand against the German people. He only fought to protect the German people from a foreign invader. That's how he thought of it.
And you can see why you would think that he's a decent man, then.
On top of that, I think he actually had a hand in Operation Valkyrie, which was it was either that one or the other one. He had a hand on one of the big assassination attempts on Hitler.
Hmm.
One of which was Operation Valkyrie,
Okay.
which they made a terrible movie about. But it's a movie about the assassination attempt on Adolf Hitler by Germans, starring Tom Cruise, where nobody makes any attempt to do a German accent.
Wonderful.
It's great. Uh,
There's a related point I want to get to. Or you could say a fallacy that ties in with other fallacies we've talked about. That we tend to think of the present as inherently better than the past.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Give your thoughts on that.
a lot of people, modern progressivism basically believes that every second in the future, right now the world is better than it was 5 seconds ago because the future is always better than the past. Not necessarily. Sometimes from an objective standpoint, the best that you can say is that when you weigh the goods and the bads, is that they're equal. That's the best that you can say. Because there's the opposite fallacy that the where people romanticize history. And they say that, oh, this was so much better in the past. And particularly now, you get people romanticizing back to the 50s, the 1950s, or not even that. We get people romanticizing back to the 1980s as being like this high point in American culture and morality, which it absolutely was not.
Yeah, I feel like that extends as far back as your love of 80s music and then doesn't necessarily extend past that.
Yeah, that basically goes to, yeah, I like Guns N' Roses. Okay, next question.
Mm-hmm.
Or like, yeah, I like Bon Jovi too. Next question. But the answer is the same to both, is that man is flawed. Man is just as wicked and just as evil and just as fallen and has just as much potential for evil now as he always has.
Yep.
Are there, like, say, if we talk about the Middle Ages, was the average person's morality in the Middle Ages higher than it is now? Absolutely. At least if we're talking about Europe in the Middle Ages.
Hmm.
Like, the average common working man in Europe had a higher morality than the average common working man today. Absolutely. You know what the average common working man, or even anybody, period, in the Middle Ages didn't have? Penicillin and flushing toilets.
Yeah, I kind of want those things.
We kind of want those things. So, I don't know. Different people would have different metrics. But I would still say that the absolute best that you can say is that all ages are to an extent equal, as far as how the good and the bad. Some are definitely bad.
Mm-hmm.
Some are definitely worse than others. Like, I would say we are currently living in a particularly bad age where science has every possible advancement and is pursuing every possible advancement, but people still can't define what a woman is.
Yeah, so how far have you risen and how far have you fallen?
Which that was not ever going to be a question in the Middle Ages. Nobody had any problem. I guarantee you, not a single person in Europe in the Middle Ages had any problem answering the question of what a woman is. Except maybe either some excessively intellectual theologian hidden away in a monastery somewhere, or some crazy whacked out heretic who lived by himself in the woods. Because weird ideas have always sort of existed on the margins, but I would say that it was definitely not anywhere close to as widespread as it is now, having a hard time describing what a woman actually is. But we have AI, so we're better than everybody back then. Actually, not really.
Yeah. We have more
Actually, you can make
tools.
an argument that makes us worse.
Yeah, it's a good way of looking at it. Like we have
Because
more
we have tools and machines that do our work for us rather than us doing the work.
and we're able to do so much more and we're able to live longer, but we're also on the flip side able to screw up a lot more things. So yeah, so progress is new inventions are improvements, but only after a fashion, only if used rightly.
Yeah. So the progressives are wrong, and the romanticizers are wrong.
One is not better than the other. You have to have both.
And the best anecdote that I have for this is another quote that I have from Henri Pirenne, who was a Belgian historian from the 1920s, who was involved very heavily in the start of the humanist movement in history, which is basically what I've been saying, is that look at people in the past as actual human beings and treat them that way and actually have a little bit of empathy
Hmm.
and understanding for maybe their plights and their issues, and acknowledge the things that maybe they didn't know. So, the story about Henri Pirenne, I don't remember all the details, but he was walking through the city once. He was Belgian, with one of his, I think, former students, another member of the humanist movement, a younger guy. And they're talking back and forth, and they come upon this building that is freshly built. It's a government building or something. It's only a couple of years. It's either a couple of years old or it was just very recently completed. And the younger man starts scoffing at the building and how this new modern architecture is so terrible and bad. And Pirenne replies basically by saying, "Well, I actually like it. I think it's quite nice. I think it's quite pretty." And the student looks at him and says, "Well, how could you possibly think that? That this new thing is so good?" And Pirenne responded by saying, "If I were an antiquarian, I would have eyes only for old things. I am an historian, therefore I love life."
Which is a brilliant
And
quote.
if
Yeah.
you're an actual historian, you need to not only pay attention to the past, but also the present. You need to be just as involved in the present, if not more so, as you are in the past.
Yeah. Antiquarianism makes me think of antique shops. And there's a reason that the antique shop is not the centerpiece of your town. Like, it exists somewhere,
Yeah.
but
And there will
it's
be
only
some
one
pretty good
facet.
things in there, but
Yeah.
the antiquarian is sort of to the study of history what the suburban woman that goes antiquing just is to
Okay.
regular people who are trying to live. It's like, oh, I just love filling my house with antiques because it's such a great vibe. And no, I just love old things. Okay,
Yeah, that's fine.
that's
Just
fine.
don't just don't say they're inherently
Aesthetically
better.
pleasing, that's fine.
Hmm.
And even today, we sometimes we often look at other cultures. Like look at it, think about it this way. So I'm a carpenter. I work with wood, and I hear a lot of people looking at Japanese carpentry and the joinery that they do over in Japan, and they go, "Oh, it's just so much better than what we have." Like everything that traditional Japanese carpentry has is so much better than anything that we have to offer. But then you actually study, say, traditional English carpentry, it's not actually a whole lot different, fundamentally speaking.
Okay.
The difference is it's not that the Japanese carpentry is better. Uh, well, for one thing, a lot of what Japan has is so good because they had to perfect. The only way they could make the crappy materials they had available to them was to perfect their use them in this very specific way. That's why Japanese swords are so sharp and so good. That's why Japanese carpentry is so good because they're making do with what they have and they have to do it exactly right. It's also a cultural thing with Japan, but it's not that they're better. It's just that Japan is one of those countries that has done such a good job of still, at least in certain places, preserving its traditions
Hmm.
culturally. Whereas in the West, we decided just to completely upend all of our traditions and get rid of them because they were old and tired and we don't need them anymore.
Sure.
Except for like the 4 people that did. And then only now are we, after like 150 years, are people saying, oh, maybe we shouldn't have done that. So, gee, I'm glad that those 4 guys back 150 years ago actually preserved these traditions, or we wouldn't have any place to be. But anyway,
No, fair enough.
so I've spent a lot of time talking about how people do history incorrectly.
Mm-hmm.
Probably better if we leave on a positive note.
Yeah, how do we
Tell
do it right?
people, how do you do it right?
Mm-hmm.
First and foremost, you should remember that you're talking about people, ultimately, human beings. You cannot study history without studying human beings, at least in any depth at all. Unless you're just going to be there studying the cold, hard facts of names and faces and places and dates. But we've also already discussed why that's not all it is. Now, the cold, hard facts are not the be all end all, but you should not ignore them. While history is still up to interpretation, there are still facts and matters of record that cannot be ignored, even if that means that your thesis is wrong, which means that you should allow yourself to be disproven. Never, ever, and this is true just for anything, for any form of logic that you're practicing. Don't ever try to blunt force your way to the answer that you want
Mm-hmm.
because you've just decided that it's the right answer.
It's not honest.
That's not intellectual honesty in any way. And avoid all the common fallacies, which I've already mentioned. David Hackett Fisher outlines them better than I possibly could. So go check out his book. It's very good. So, excuse me, if I'm to leave you with recommended reading, if you're starting to learn particularly European history and the methods of history practiced by Europe, I highly recommend this book, which is The Theory and Practice of History by Leopold von Ranke, who is the first modern historian. I think he was German. Maybe he was Dutch. I don't know. But Leopold von Ranke's The Theory and Practice of History is excellent. Now, this is a guy who spent a couple of years in a prison camp and, as a political prisoner, wrote a book while he was in prison and, in the process, invented footnotes.
Really?
Yeah. So, while he was in prison, I forget what he was in prison for, but while he was in prison, he decided he was going to write this book. It was either a history of Europe or a history of the Germanic peoples or something. So he writes this book, but he also knows that he has to prove the things that he's saying. So as he's writing, he deliberately leaves space at the bottom of the page and puts marks on the page where he wants to reference or where he wants the references to correspond to.
Sure. Yeah.
And what that sort of wound up doing was create an uninterrupted stream of thought, an uninterrupted stream of intellect that he then, down in the footnotes, winds up being able to prove. Because he basically said he knew he wasn't going to be in there forever, so he basically said, all right, I don't have access to my library right now, so I'll just leave space at the bottom of the page, and then I'll write my references in there. And then when people read it later, they go, oh, this is actually way better than what we've been doing, which is writing our references in every time we make a reference.
Yeah, it's genius. So
basically, it's just unbroken thought. And he told it like a complete story. So von Ranke is excellent. I also highly recommend anything written by Christopher Dawson, one of the best historians of the last century, if not the best. Very, very, very good. I just started reading, what is it? The Movement of World Revolution that he wrote today. It's excellent.
all right.
So also, Niall Ferguson is a good author. He's a Scottish historian. Also very good. But just be very, very cautious when you're reading something that somebody wrote. Don't just look at the credentials. Keep in mind any potential biases that they might have had.
Mm-hmm.
Because even if you try to avoid all the fallacies that I've talked about, if you do it as best as you possibly can, there are still pitfalls that you'll fall into, and there are still biases that you're going to have in pursuing history. So anytime you're reading history, you just got to keep that in mind. That there are always biases and always different points of view.
Yeah. All right, folks. I have enjoyed listening to Ethan on this, and I hope you have too. So go and nerd out a bit, perhaps, with one of those books. We'll link those in the description. And until next time, have a good one.